had to find out what is going on in Ghana. With ExxonMobil yesterday with this announcement of exiting, now you got another oil firm says it's exiting Ghana's, or selling 50% stake in Ghana's deep water offshore block. What's the problem over there in Accra? We'll find out for you here on the show. Now let's go back home to Nigeria, where the Investment Promotion Commission, or NIPC, has released a financial summary outlining the agency's revenue, payments into the consolidated federation account, as well as the agency's operating surplus. Joining me to drill into the latest financial summary is the head of the agency itself, Yewande Sadiku. Good evening, Yewande. It's good to have you on the show. Thank you for coming on the program.
Good evening, Bosun. Thank you for having me.
You know, I love financial transparency and reporting. You're an investment banker by profession, so I'm sure you very well understand why you need to brief the market. In this case, you're a public civil servant, so briefing your superiors or your employees, as it were, and the entire country is a sign of responsibility. More of that we want to see for other MDAs. So let's get started into what we have on our hands. What are the highlights of this latest financial summary report that you just released by your office?
Thank you. So I'd first like to start by saying that the business of NIPC, investment promotion, is not by default a revenue-generating activity itself. But on the basis of delegated authority, we happen to process pioneer status applications, which accounts for about 96% of NIPC's IGR year on year. Over the last 5 years, it's been 96% of NIPC's IGR. And from January 2016 to the end of March 2021, we generated total IGR of 11.6 billion. In November 2016, NIPC was added to the schedule to the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2007. From that date, based on the law, NIPC has been subject to remitting 80% of its operating surplus to the Consolidated Revenue Fund. That's the amount that is left over after you expend approved expenses from your IGR. And in the period from January 2016 to end of March 2021, NIPC has remitted 5.36 billion to the Consolidated Revenue Fund. It's not a big amount if you think in the context of what Customs announced recently in relation to their IGR generation over the last 5 months. But as I said, first of all, we're not a revenue-generating agency by default, but I like the financial accountability and transparency that my colleagues and I at NIPC have tried to hold ourselves to. So from January 2016 to end of March 2021, what we remitted to the Consolidated Revenue Fund, modest as it is, represents 46% of the IGR that we generated over the period. Every quarter, in line with standards that we hold ourselves up to, and in line with the provisions of the Freedom of Information Act, we actually put out quarterly information on NIPC's operations, financial information, procurement information, legal information, staff information, and the like, as required by the Freedom of Information Act. So it was in the spirit of that proactive disclosure that this report was put out today.
Very interesting in terms of disclosure and transparency and accountability. Of course, that's what everyone wants to see moving forward from a whole lot more of MDAs. But of course, the NIPC, as you said, is not one of the frontline revenue-generating agency. So how really do you manage your finances? You spent 5 years in office as the Executive Secretary or Director General at the NIPC.
So NIPC is lucky that it actually has access to its internally generated revenue, because without it, the organization will struggle to fully deliver its mandate. And that is part of why I think it is important that NIPC demonstrates responsibility in managing, what it generates from that perspective. But we get some funding from the federal government, and then we get our IGR. In particular, because NIPC's IGR, first of all, is not a steady flow month on month. You can have periods. Last year, from January to July, we generated IGR of only 18 million. But we closed the year at 3 billion. That demonstrates the volatility in the IGR. So personnel is paid by government, and then some overheads, also come from government. But the bulk of our funding of our operations comes from NIPC's IGR. It probably accounts for about 87% of NIPC's annual funding costs.
So what are you allowed to spend by law, by regulation, and put into the consolidated account, which the federal government and the CEO himself, Mr. President, keeps a permanent eye on a daily basis? So, and when you do this payment, how do I get to know what you pay?
Okay, so Finance Act 2020 now requires agencies that are on the schedule to the Fiscal Responsibility Act to expend no more than 50% of their revenue. There's now a requirement that your cost to revenue ratio should not exceed 50%. That means you have 50% left as operating surplus. The law then requires that 80% of that operating surplus is paid into the Consolidated Revenue Fund on a quarterly basis. This is now law since 2020, based on it was the Finance Act 2020's amendment to the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2007. So for the first quarter of 2021, NIPC's IGR came to 1.1 billion. We've remitted the payments due to the Consolidated Revenue Fund from that IGR, but it is now a legal requirement for agencies to do this on a quarterly basis. It wasn't in the law on a quarterly basis until, Finance Act 2020.
Okay, so in a manner of speaking, if I look at some of the, I'm looking at some treasury receipts for the CRF payments. Is that a way to track all these payments? I'm saying this was for the 2017 for CRF payments, 2016 to 2018. And I'm looking at about 1.25 billion there in this particular receipt, which was paid in 2019. So this is how the accounting process goes, isn't it?
Yes. So previously, there was a circular that the SGF issued, I believe, in 2018, that required agencies to remit on a quarterly basis. Previously, based on the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2007, those remittances were made on an annual basis. But as I said, with Finance Act 2020, it now requires agencies to do so on a quarterly basis, and we will do that at NIPC. The report we put out just reflects, it summarizes what we've done from 2016 to essentially to date.
All right. Thank you so much, Yewande Sadiku, Executive Secretary at the Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission. Thank you so much for your time tonight. And we love that those disclosures and transparency in reporting.